I guess he's emeritus, visiting professor of politics and history at Hillsdale College, retiring in 2013, and he's currently the John A. Howard Distinguished Fellow for Family and Religious Studies at the International Organization for the Family and editor of The Natural Family, an international journal of research and policy. In addition, Allan is a senior editor of Touchstone, a journal of mere Christianity. He also served for 22 years as editor of the Marriage and Family Studies series for Transaction Books, the publisher of record in international social science. Carlson received his PhD in modern European history from The Ohio University. His doctoral dissertation was published as the Swedish missing a page here. Well, we will simply turn it over to Allan Carlson.
That was the Swedish experiment in family policy. But I also wrote a book, a chapter of a book on desperate Swedish socialist housewives. And I always thought it would make a great television show, but there really were Swedish socialist housewives. And they enjoyed great political power in the 1940s and 1950s. But that's another talk. As Professor Salter mentioned, when you turn to intellectual history, distributism has an English or European accent. And perhaps I should note, as I start, that today I speak to you as a historian, a distributist, an agrarian, and a pronatalist. A pronatalist. Babies. They're good. Okay. Now, as a philosophy urging the widespread ownership of productive land, family-scale farming, artisanship, strong local economies, and significant household self-sufficiency, distributism did define fertile soil in North America nearly a century ago. One strain of ideas and action was homegrown, and best exemplified in the work of Ralph Borsodi, spelled B-O-R-S-O-D-I. A second strain came as a direct import from G.K. Chesterton's editorial office, in the person of historian Herbert Agar, spelled A-G-A-R. Uniting both versions in a distinctive American idiom were the pen and projects of the Jesuit priest John C. Rawe, spelled R-A-W-E. Ralph Borsodi was born 1888 in New York City to immigrant parents from Hungary. And I note as an aside that Borsodi beer is still a favorite brand in Budapest. He received no formal education. In contemporary terms, he was homeschooled. His father became active in the single tax movement, inspired by the economic theories of Henry George. These Georgists argued that a stiff tax on the speculative value of urban land and buildings was both just and sufficient to fund all the costs of state and local government. Such a system would leave agricultural land nearly tax-free, favoring family farms. Among young Borsodi's early mentors was Bolton Hall, author of the book A Little Land and a Living, which made the case for self-sufficient homesteads in the country. Again, following his father's example, Borsodi, Borsodi entered the burgeoning new fields of marketing and advertising. His prominent clients included the National Retail Dry Goods Association and the R.H. Macy department store. In 1911, he married Myrtle May Simpson, an Iowa farmer's daughter who had come to the big city seeking work. After their sons were born, the Borsotis looked for an escape from urban grime and crime and moved to a rundown farmstead on 7 acres to the north in Rockland County. By then, Borsodi was growing increasingly disillusioned with contemporary capitalism. He emphasized the artificial nature of joint stock corporations, which held privileges such as limited liability, perpetual life, and the use of stocks and bonds to raise capital, which laws denied to natural families. In several books, he showed how large American corporations no longer sought to meet consumer needs. Instead, they worked to create needs and swell profits through emotional manipulation and advertising, high-pressure marketing, and consumer debt. The consistent goal was to replace home production for use, such as gardening, the keeping of chickens, and even maternal breastfeeding, with factory-made products. Indeed, one of Borsodi's central arguments was that power machinery was a true blessing to human life and liberty, yet a gift blighted by the dominion of central factories. As he wrote, "It is the factory, not the machine, which is reducing all men and all commodities to a dead level of uniformity, because the factory makes it impossible for individual men and individual communities to be self-sufficient." He continued, "It is the factory, not the machine, which is destroying skilled craftsmen, to whom work is a means of self-expression as well as a means of support." Borsodi summarized, "Against the family, the factory wages a ruthless war of extermination." The good news, he reported, was that new decentralized power sources, such as the electrical grid and the internal combustion engine, had made possible a liberation from factories. Production could return home, enjoying most of the efficiencies and gains delivered by the machines. His own research showed that such family-scale production was superior for over 2/3 of the goods and services which the average family consumed. The Borsodis also, in a way, discovered modern homeschooling. Pulling their boys out of the local school, they found that only 2 hours a day of coursework was necessary for their children to keep pace with their public school counterparts. Moreover, the Borsodis learned, as all homeschool parents learned, that true education, quote, was really reciprocal. In the very effort to educate the boys, we educated ourselves. Building on these insights, Borsodi wrote books including Flight from the City and Prosperity and Security, laying out the arguments for a broad return to self-sufficient homesteads. He also founded the School of Living to train young couples in the forgotten skills of independence, vegetable gardening, food preservation, poultry and dairy animal care, furniture production, spinning and weaving for family use, and skills for the construction of house and outbuildings. The natural family, he affirmed, would be the normal nucleus around which to build such a home. Borsodi homesteads of this sort mushroomed across the land, particularly out east. And yet there was a problem within Borsodi's otherwise provocative thinking, a moral black hole. Not only was he an atheist, but militantly so. As he wrote in his best-selling 1929 book, This Ugly Civilization, until we utterly and completely exorcise all religion from our being, until we drop all fears, superstitions, rituals, habits which spring from religion, no true spiritual comfort is possible. Only later would he learn to silence this wholly extraneous side of his advocacy. The second, or imported, strain of distributism came from Herbert Agar. He descended from an old Louisiana family with modern degrees from a New Jersey prep school and Columbia and Princeton universities. During a sojourn in England, he turned his attention to analyzing American economic and political woes. As he later wrote, "I had known for years that in some way the America I loved was being strangled and that it might not survive. But strangled by what?" He found answers in the philosophy expounded by Hilaire Belloc and G.K. Chesterton, leading him to take on an editorial position at the latter's publication, G.K.'s Weekly. Here he found men, quote, whose ardor came straight from the French Revolution, and whose thought was rooted in the spiritual affirmation of democracy which underlies the Christian faith. Their work first made it possible for me to recognize the enemy I wanted to fight. That enemy for Agar was finance capitalism, characterized by plutocrats and economic monopolies sustained by a corrupt politics. Agar believed that these forces had conspired to destroy the artisans and family farms, consolidating the ownership of land and other productive property into ever fewer hands. This turned owners into tenants, craftsmen into industrial slaves, and free society into the servile state, a phrase he borrowed from Belloc. So far from providing freedom, he wrote, monopoly capitalism does not even desire it. Indeed, the meaning of freedom under the rule of the plutocrats has been inverted. In terms of labor, a workman had better be free from a home, because if he had a home, he would not be sufficiently mobile. Moreover, he had better be free from all family bonds. Above all, he had better be free from children. In his Pulitzer Prize-winning history of the American presidency, entitled The People's Choice, Agar traced the corruptions of money-based democracy through the nation's past, from George Washington to Warren Harding. The story of America is a tale of repeated revolts against the capitalists, he said. These had never triumphed because the temptation to betray true liberty had always been as compelling as the urge to uphold it. Democracy normally culminates in dictatorship. The money anarchy makes way for the tyrant state. Still, so long as the revolts occur, often and with intensity, we can continue hoping that someday we may become a free land and a true democracy. Now, in the distributive spirit, Agar condemned world cities, such as London, Chicago, and New York, for their clear signs of social malaise. Moral relativity, or the equal truth of all gods, was another sign here. Agar referred to a prominent New York writer who had praised the Aztec leader Montezuma for his moral flexibility, adding, in perhaps still relevant words, it is right that he should approve of Montezuma's relativism. World City is talking to World City, and they speak the same language. Montezuma was a civilized man, and he knew that all truths are relative. Instead of fretting over civilization, Agar, in the spirit of Chesterton, urged that first attention go to local cultures. As he wrote in arguably his best book, Land of the Free, the country town is still rooted in the land about it. The relation between town and countryside is still organic and healthy. Public policy should aim at the support of agrarian farmers, small town merchants, autonomous neighborhoods, and decentralized factories. Agar was not apparently a believing Christian of any sort, All the same, he praised Roman Catholicism as a force for good. Where Protestant thought of the Episcopalian form, back then, as I always said, the Episcopalian Church was Wall Street at prayer, where that tended to favor the concentration of ownership in a few hands and easy credit for the rich, the Catholic Church traditionally favored small property, hard money, and widely distributed ownership. Catholic social thought, he continued, also affirmed agrarianism as the system in which the farmer first makes himself, his family, and his beasts as self-supporting as possible, selling only those surpluses that remained. Herbert Agar was also skilled at building coalitions. In June 1936, he took the lead in organizing a meeting of agrarian and distributist leaders in Nashville, Tennessee. Ralph Borsodi was there, along with leading members of the Southern agrarians, loosely tied to Vanderbilt University. The group adopted a statement of economic and political principles, which featured key distributist themes. It opposed the denial of economic freedom found under communism, fascism, and finance capitalism. It demanded an end to the sacrifice of agriculture for the development of manufacture, while giving recognition to the primacy of agriculture in establishing a secure and desirable culture. Governments should actively help those families desiring to work land and to live on it, help them gain ownership of tracts sufficient to sustain them in security and comfort. Another product of this gathering was a decision to launch a monthly distributist magazine. Named Free America, it first appeared the following January. Agar and Borsodi were two of the founding editors, joined by the Christian philanthropist Chauncey Stillman. The journal had a clear purpose statement adopted in July 1937, and I quote here, "Free America stands for individual independence and believes that freedom can exist only in societies in which the great majority are the effective owners of tangible and productive property, and in which group action is democratic. In order to achieve such a society, ownership, production, and population must be decentralized. Free America is therefore equally opposed to finance capitalism, fascism, and communism." That last line, indeed, underscored the ideological power behind this journal. As an aside, I had the privilege of serving as the editor of a collection of essays from this journal, a journal that was published from 1937 to 1946. The volume is entitled, forgive the advertisement, Land and Liberty, the Best of Free America. It appeared about 2 years ago from the Wethersfield Institute for Catholic Thought and can be ordered through its website. There's some really good stuff in there. Also in attendance at the Nashville session was the Jesuit scholar, John C. Rawle. Born and raised on a central Illinois farm, he attended St. Louis University, earning degrees in law. He also resolved to enter the Society of Jesus. In the early 1930s, he studied theology at St. Mary's College and Seminary in Kansas. He joined there a zealous seminar of rural life advocates, in his words, turning him into the most vigorous American Catholic intellectual voice of the era for distributist and agrarian principles. His early essays picked up on legal and constitutional themes raised by Borsodi. Rawle blasted U.S. federal court decisions that had transformed commercial corporations into artificial persons, bearing rights that the founders had intended solely for real human beings. On this basis, he said, big business had since battered family-scaled farms, stores and manufacturing shops, building monopolies in their place and concentrating property ownership in ever fewer hands. Public policy must now intervene to rebuild a truly democratic and humane order, he said. As Raw explained regarding agriculture, rich acres and productive plants are safe only in the hands of a small owner, a family man who can respect, cooperate with the laws of nature, make provision for crop rotation, prevent erosion, and give paternal care to the plants and animals that feed and shelter him and his dear ones. Toward this end, Raw also emphasized that families must reinvigorate as productive units. Under the joint regime of big government and big business, both the marriage and birth rates had withered. Raw's response: we must have a rising birth rate. We must have a new vitality in Christian home life and home culture. The only way to do this, he said, was to restore the productive home, where the child could soon become an economic asset instead of remaining an economic liability. Toward this end, Raw urged that future home construction include schoolrooms and workrooms and be located on small acreages. Over a 10-year span, ending with his premature death in 1946, Raw further developed such ideas in an important series of essays and books. In 1939, for example, he was the ghost author of A Manifesto on Rural Life, a rich and lively document issued by the bishops of Fargo and Bismarck, North Dakota. The next year, he co-authored the so-called Summa of Catholic Agrarianism, Rural Roads to Security, America's Third Struggle for Freedom, where co-author Father Luigi Liguti focused on pastoral and educational matters. Raw wrote the more ideologically charged chapters. He openly called here for a green revolution, a new American campaign for liberty to be founded on family unit operation and family-based ownership of land based on religious principles. Indeed, through his forceful reconciliation of Christianity with agrarianism, John Raw did resolve the most serious problems afflicting American distributism in the mid-20th century. Most directly, he showed how the arguments employed by the atheist Ralph Borsodi and the agnostic Herbert Agar actually gained power and clarity when reframed in an openly Christian manner. Moreover, where many other Catholic writers of the era look back wistfully to the European Middle Ages as their ideal, Father Raw was an unabashed American. The social and political order that he sought to restore was that of Thomas Jefferson on his better days, not that of Thomas Aquinas. Finally, John C. Raw offered up an environmental ethic that displayed a welcome form of enchantment without descending into Druidism. Writers Christopher Hamlin and John McGreevy show that where others saw beauty and value in wild and scenic places, Raw focused on organic processes and temporal cycles. For him, nature was not sacred. However, work in nature was sacramental, centered on sky and soil, watching small parts of nature change through the seasons. In these ways, Father Raw's legacy may lie in a contemporary rediscovery of his distributist writings by 21st century Americans searching for an agrarian environmental ethic fully compatible with Christianity and true democracy, which, in a way, and I say this hopefully, brings us to this very event. The old dreams of American distributists are coming alive again. Our prior speaker being a perfect example of that. It is my privilege to be with you this weekend, to witness and be part of what may become a great, even nation-changing event. Godspeed. Any questions or comments? I always get nervous when there's none.
Thank you very much.